Most people believe to lose weight, you need the perfect plan, the perfect diet, or the perfect time. But that belief is keeping you stuck. Today, we're diving deep into why waiting for perfect conditions is the very thing that's sabotaging your progress. Because the truth is, life doesn't stop just so you can lose weight. Your children won't stop crying, your job isn't suddenly going to get easier, and people are always going to have birthdays, weddings, and holidays. So if you're waiting for things to calm down, you're setting yourself up for a life of excuses. Because the problem isn't your circumstances, it's how you're reacting to them. This episode may make you feel uncomfortable because we're calling out excuses and the victim mentality. But most importantly, we're going to share with you exactly how you can break free. And we're going to be sharing with you the exact same strategy we give our one-on-one coaching clients, which is to try and improve 1% every single day. Let's get into it. Hello, welcome to another episode of the Never Diet Again podcast. I'm Max Lowry, weight loss coach and behavioral change expert. And I'm joined by Shane, who's the head of the Live 360 program. Hello, Shane.
Hello, Max.
How you doing?
Very well. Nice to be back after a long hiatus.
Yeah, so Shane was helping me with the podcast before, but then you've had an insane medieval torture device in your mouth.
Medieval orthodontic treatment, which is why I can't help but feel, now that I've got this big gap between my teeth and I have braces fitted, is the moment you've chosen to do video for the podcast. So the absolute worst possible moment. But I can talk again now, which I couldn't before. So here we are.
Oh, that's ideal for a podcast.
Yeah.
Cool. So look, today we're talking about something really important, which is a big mistake that people make when it comes to changing their behavior and losing weight. And that is waiting for perfect conditions to do something. And the reason I wanted to talk about this subject anyway, but what kind of brought it to the forefront of my mind is a potential client that I had a conversation with just before Christmas. So I'm not going to say her name, but I thought it was a really good example of this. So this person was a recent mum of 2 young children. She'd been through all sorts of kind of IVF therapy, and her body was, recovering from the IVF and having 2 young children. You know, when I spoke to her, she was very ill, very overwhelmed, all over the place, children crying. And to be honest, this is not really, this is quite typical of the clients that we work with. You know, we work with women over the age of 40, and a lot of them are very busy. They've got jobs, full-time jobs, and they've got young children. So, you know, we're not, this kind of situation isn't new to us. What was really interesting about this lady is once I started to kind of dial into why was she struggling, what was her life looking like, what was going on, it became very clear that she was essentially waiting for perfect conditions to start. And don't get me wrong, obviously this sounds completely ridiculous coming from a 34-year-old with 2 cats and no children. You know, it's easy for you to say, Max, but the reason that I can say this is because we've had clients exactly the same in the program, like all the time, in exactly the same situation, who are reacting to their situation very, very differently. Because essentially what this client was doing was, she said, look, before I had children, I had all this structure and things were easy. So I need that structure to get results. I need to go back. Like, the only way that I can get these results is if I have all the exact same structure to which I had before. You know, maybe I need to get a dog. Maybe I need to get a divorce, I think she even said. I don't know how that works. And I was like, yeah, I can't help you with that. And she said, maybe if I had a childminder, maybe if I had all these different things. And look, of course, all those things would make life much easier for her. But what I wanted to do on that call was potentially just open to her mind to, she doesn't have those things now. So what can she do? Like, what could she do in this situation to improve the situation and potentially start to lose weight and make a stressful situation more stressful with her reactions? Because once I started to dial into it a bit more, it turns out she had these beliefs about food waste, which is a very, very big problem for a lot of our clients. I think it comes from, you know, grandparents and certain generations kind of going through rationing in World War II. So she had this belief that she shouldn't waste food. So she'd cook food for her children, and then she would eat the food that they left over because they were quite fussy. And then she'd kind of be full and then want to have dinner with her partner, but then like kind of would have dinner even though she's not really hungry, and then she was getting stressed out about it, so she was turning to more food to deal with the stress of life. It's a bit of a kind of a vicious cycle there, and I was trying to open her mind up to the idea like, well, one thing you could do right there in that moment is not finish the child's food. Like, you don't need to finish it, or you could box it up, put it in Tupperware, and save it for the meal the next day. And like, it's obviously so basic, like basic like advice, but obviously when you're wrapped up in all this kind of stress, it can be very difficult to just look at, to see the basics. And ultimately, you know, obviously that's where having a coach does come in.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll explore how to navigate this, obviously, as part of this podcast. But I'll give another example that I tried to give in another podcast and didn't explain it too well. So round two. A lot of people might have seen the podcast a little while ago that Stephen Bartlett did with a guy, I think he's called Johan Hari. He's a journalist who writes about Ozempic and his experience with Ozempic, basically. And he was giving this example of Japan, where because of the way their sort of the food they serve to kids in school, the culture they have around food about eating, I think they eat until they're 80% full, like all these things in their environment mean that Japan has very low obesity rates. But what you see is that Japanese people who emigrate to Hawaii actually have the same obesity rates as Hawaiians, which is significantly higher than Japanese people. And his point there is that we need, you know, reform on a mass scale. We need to feed kids different food, remove ultra-processed foods from the supermarkets. And like, I'm all for all of that. But the reality is that isn't the situation. And I think what we'll get into now is that, yes, controlling your external environment when it is possible just makes sense because it makes life easier, it reduces friction. But really, you shouldn't be that dependent on your external environment to succeed. And really, what needs to happen is a shift in the internal environment so that external environment is still important, but you're less dependent on it to succeed.
100%. And this is basically the route that most coaches will go down. They'll just try and manipulate your external environment. So, i.e., get rid of temptation in your house. What are other examples of this?
Scheduling and repetition,
yes,
and like everything
scheduling,
happens.
repetition. Walk to work instead of drive. Get in this situation, get a childminder. Get your partner to look after your children so you can go on a walk. And look, it's not to say that those things aren't important. Of course they are. Like, those things can make life much, much easier. But what we also do is we address the internal environment. So, and what is the reason I'm able to kind of talk about this with experience is because, like I said earlier, we've had so many clients in exactly the same situation who have had our help and addressed this, and they've got incredible results. Actually been some of our best clients. You know, Ellen, to name one, who you can listen to her podcast, 3 young children under the age of 5, full-time work, has lost like 45, 50 pounds now or something. Completely changed her life. And that is because she changed her internal environment. So what does that mean? So your internal environment, essentially your thoughts, your beliefs, your mindset, your emotional regulation, your reactions, all of that. So sometimes your internal environment can exacerbate and perpetuate the external environment and make it worse, ultimately. So you have this stress that's going on in your life, and then the way that you react to that stress is a negative feedback loop, which makes life worse. Things get worse instead of getting better.
I think one of the misconceptions, one of the fundamental misconceptions people have here that leads to this sort of perfectionist mindset where they are waiting for the ideal conditions is people don't realize that changing your behavior, whether that's weight loss or any other goal, it's just a messier process than people want it to be. Like, it's not a straight linear line. It's not wait until you have the perfect plan, you have the perfect conditions, and then you tick everything off, 100%. It is more of a dance. It's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, do a little spin. It's a much less sexy process than people realize. And if you the sooner you get into it, get into the mess, you can see what works and what doesn't. And from there you can tweak. I heard this really great analogy from someone the other day. And he said, you can't steer a parked car. And so everyone's waiting for the perfect conditions to try and like navigate, but you just have to get going and you have to build some form of momentum. And from there you can correct what you're doing and see what works and what doesn't. But you just have no idea if you're sat around waiting.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. And waiting for perfect conditions will mean that you are struggling with this problem for the rest of your life. Perfect conditions do not exist. The perfect time, if there was one, is now. A lot of the clients that join, maybe they have a holiday coming up, maybe they're moving house, maybe there's something in their life, and they're like, oh, but what about this? What about this? And the question I always pose to them is, okay, so what do you think is going to be more useful for you? Is it having coaching and assistance and support and learning how to navigate difficult situations, the Christmas period, holidays, weddings? Is that more valuable, having assistance and learning how to navigate those things? Or is having coaching and support when you've got nothing on? It's the big middle of COVID, for example, lockdown. You can't go out, you can't go to the restaurants, there's no temptation, you can't even really go to the shops, you're stuck. What's going to be more useful for you? What is more realistic for, like, what is your life going to look like in the long term? Life is holidays, weddings, social occasions, birthdays, Christmas. So the only way that you're actually going to get long-term results is if you learn how to lose weight and navigate those situations and enjoy them, like all our clients are.
It'd make our lives easier if we didn't take clients on in that position, but it's not really any use to them.
Yeah, for sure. It would make our lives easier, but I'm not here to have an easy life. I'm here to get results for clients, as you are. And actually, to be honest, now that we've done this for so long, I don't think it's that complicated.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
It is. And I think there are a lot of people who say a lot of stuff on social media, and I think a lot of the women that we speak to at the start, they really do think this is too good to be true. Like, how can you go on holiday, enjoy social occasions, eat what you want at weddings, go out for dinners, and lose weight at the same time? They believe it's not possible. But when you do address the internal and the external environment at the same time, you really can. So this is just another example of how long-term weight loss, long-term behavioral change is mostly about how you think and what you believe, and it's in your head. And it's not just weight loss. So your internal environment could be making every aspect of your life worse. If you're in a job where you catastrophize, where you believe that you're an imposter, where you believe that you're not good enough to be there, where you can have all this stress put on you at work, and then you're going to react in a way where you're potentially going to procrastinate, you're going to be a perfectionist, you're going to get really, really stressed. It's going to take longer than it needs to, and that's going to maybe actually feed into the idea that you're not good enough to do the job because it's taking you longer. So really managing your internal environment and learning what is making things worse instead of helping you navigate or manage a situation is key to becoming the best version of yourself. One big problem that a lot of our clients deal with is emotional eating. So if the only way that you know how to regulate your emotions is by turning to food, then in this lady's situation, you're going to be stressed because of everything that's going on, and maybe you're going to be wrapping yourself up into more stress because you are also putting on weight at the same time, and you're thinking, oh, there's nothing I can possibly do because I don't have any control over this situation. I'm a victim of this situation. So you turn to food to deal with that stress because that's the only way that you know how to. Then it becomes a negative feedback loop of you're turning to food in times of stress, which means more weight goes on, which means you get more stressed and more frustrated with the situation. You feel more of a victim. You're waiting for these perfect conditions. Whereas, if you were able to process your emotions differently in a way that didn't involve food, you might still feel stressed, but you'd be relieving your emotions in a different way, dealing with your emotions in a different way, like walking, like journaling, like meditation, like breathing, like stretching, like yoga, any of these things. And then maybe you'd be maintaining your weight instead of putting on weight, which means at least the situation wouldn't be getting any worse.
Yeah, again, it comes back to this idea of waiting for the perfect external environment. You can remove these foods that you usually turn to in times of difficult emotions from your house, or you can wait until work isn't stressful. But it's almost more work to do that because you put in all the effort to lose the weight when the conditions are perfect. You haven't learned how to navigate the imperfect conditions, and that's where you get stuck in this yo-yo cycle. So maybe that's another sort of belief people have, a misconception, is that it's harder to start in imperfect conditions. And it's more difficult to navigate in terms of it being a little bit more complex, perhaps. But in the long term, if it means that you sustain the results you achieve, and you're not constantly losing and regaining the same 10 kilos over and over again, it's arguably the easier route to take.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think it's more valuable.
Yeah.
If you get good at something in difficult conditions, it means that potentially when things aren't as difficult, then it's much, much easier. So our clients that join, we had quite a few clients join in December, and a lot of them lost some weight in December at the same time as enjoying life. And so obviously December is a particularly difficult period. So the fact that they got results in a difficult period means that January, February, March, April, and the year, much, much easier. Same even in December with the weather. It's much darker. It's not, not nearly as easy. It takes more motivation to go outside and get the steps in. But a lot of them have gone and, upped their steps as part of our step challenge. And they're setting themselves up for success when eventually in the Northern Hemisphere, in the UK, the weather does get better at some point in June, then it gets worse on June 2nd. So the ideal situation is you are addressing both at the same time. So you're manipulating your environment in any way that you can. So yes, potentially removing the temptation from your house. Yes, potentially, like in this example with the children, you are using things like, not finishing their food and putting their food into Tupperware instead of eating it all. Maybe instead of focusing on doing these runs and workouts that this lady was doing before, she was just getting some steps in, asking her partner to look after children and just go out and get 15 minutes in, 15 minutes a break from the children. Alongside, what are the limiting beliefs which are keeping her stuck? How is she processing her emotions? Addressing the critical inner voice, which was keeping her stressed and leading to self-sabotage, shifting her identity out of a bit of a victim mentality, to be honest. She was a victim of her circumstances, and being a victim means you are powerless. You can't do anything about the situation. And I think this is a whole kind of topic in itself, the victim mentality. And I think this client didn't end up becoming a client. In fact, she ghosted me afterwards, which does happen sometimes. Because sometimes what I say can trigger people, and I'm not here to say what people want to hear. Neither is Shane, neither any of the team. We're not here to massage people's egos and to tell people it's okay. We're here to tell them what they need to hear in order to get results. So, and I think the issue with the victim mentality is it can really become part of your identity, where you're constantly telling everyone that, oh, I'm like this because of this, I'm like that because of this, I can't do anything about it, oh, it's terrible, my life. And there's kind of some benefits to being a victim. You kind of get a dopamine hit, you get sympathy from other people, and it can feel good being a victim. But actually, it will keep you stuck. And the issue is when you've been a victim for so long and suddenly you're exposed to information which helps you realize that actually you don't have to be a victim, that being a victim is a choice. You can be a survivor of your situation. Sometimes that can scare people, and suddenly they have to admit that they were wrong for their entire lives. And they have to face up to not just themselves, but also to everyone around them that actually they were full of shit and they could have done something about it. And I mean that with sympathy, because obviously people do have very difficult situations. A lot of our clients we've worked with thousands of clients over the years, and they've come from all sorts of different backgrounds and had all sorts of things happen to them, trauma and all sorts of things. So we have that sympathy, but ultimately being a victim of your situation is a choice, and you've got to ask yourself, is that choice empowering you and making things easier, or is it keeping you stuck exactly where you are?
Yeah, I definitely been through that experience myself. I think another point worth touching on, maybe a little bit of practical advice around overcoming the all or nothing thinking. Because again, people have they wait for this perfectly crafted plan and think that success relies on or is dependent on them perfectly following that plan. However, you do need whilst that doesn't work, you do need some structure in place. So something that I like to use with clients is sort of ranges or broader definitions of what success is. For example, people might commit to 3 gym sessions a week, just to give an example. And then they think, okay, I have to go to the gym for 60 minutes 3 times a week. Whereas if we just broaden that definition to, okay, I'm going to move my body in a structured way 3 times a week, then when you're ill, when you get home from work late, when whatever else is going on, that 60-minute workout could just be a 10-minute walk. And psychologically, you're still staying consistent, and it feels like you maintain that momentum because you've been a little bit more flexible with what you're trying to do. Same with sort of a step target. You go from like 5 to 10,000 instead of just a strict 10. Just a little bit more flexibility in your approach goes a long way.
Yeah, 100%. And that's exactly what I think was happening with this client. Her definition of a workout was, and her only experience with it was when she was doing like marathons and half marathons when she was, before she was married, before she had children. So she was like, well, I can't do that, so therefore I can't do anything. What's the point? So a lot of our job is doing exactly what you described. Is like, okay, well, what can you do? Something is better than nothing. Don't set yourself 20,000 steps to do. Why don't you just set the target of getting outside at least once a day? And I think the issue is people don't have the confidence in themselves to make the right decisions in that respect. And they also think, well, that's not enough to get results. And because they're cut from a place of intensity. They want to do the most to get the biggest result. And that leads to short-term success and the weight coming back on. Whereas the way that we come from it is consistency beats intensity all day long. We are here for, like, consistency is the only thing that will get you results. But for a lot of people, it's the hardest thing to achieve. And that's because most people are doing completely ridiculous things in the short term to get results. So they are never going to be consistent.
It just requires a bit of a mindset shift. Again, people, they look at, for example, that 60-minute workout compared to a 10-minute walk. People will look at that and say, well, yeah, the 10-minute walk isn't going to get me stronger. And like, no, it might not. But that's not the point. The point of doing less in that instance isn't to take you closer to the goal in that moment, per se. It's just to show that you have skin in the game. It's to show that you've kept some form of commitment to yourself. It maintains that momentum, and it's significantly easier to gradually turn things up from there when you have at least done something, rather than coming from a dead stop every time you burn out because you're trying to do too much.
Yeah, and this cycle of going all in essentially perpetuates a belief and an identity that you can't be consistent and that you can't succeed at weight loss and that you don't have the willpower, the motivation, and the discipline. Because really, you're setting yourself up to fail from the very beginning. You're self-sabotaging yourself. You're sabotaging yourself before you even begin. And so obviously when you inevitably fail, they see, told you, you can't do this. What's the point in even trying? You're pathetic. All the critical inner voice comes in for a lot of our clients. Whereas when you do it like this, 1% improvements every day, gradually just proving to yourself that, oh, I can be consistent with something. Oh, actually, this is way more enjoyable. Oh, I feel so much better from doing this. Then day by day, you actually start to shift your identity. You start to rid yourself of the limiting beliefs that you can't do this. And that's ultimately when you start to really build momentum and get the long-term success. And that's exactly why, I don't know about you, Shane, but why I do what I do is because I'm here to help people become the best version of themselves, address all the root causes, and so their life improves in so many different ways, not just lose weight in the short term.
Yeah, 100%. I just want to touch on something you mentioned there. You talked about making it more enjoyable. I think this is the other thing that happens when you have this all or nothing approach, is that it's always this divide between everyday life and your weight loss approach. And the weight loss becomes a chore, and it's something you like have to, it starts on Monday. It's this big ominous thing that looms in the future. But when you are a little bit more flexible, when you take the pressure off, when you embrace the mess and just take it a little bit more, just take everything, approach it from a little bit more of a light-hearted standpoint, then it does become something you actively seek out. Like the habits you're incorporating, the movement, the eating healthier, whatever it is, because there's not this constant pressure around them, it actually feels good, and you can notice that it feels good, and it doesn't just become a chore you need to tick off. It's like, oh, actually, this is something I now actively seek out, and it starts to feel easier in that regard. Whereas if it's, this is the rigid plan, anytime I miss, I'm a failure, it adds lots of stress, lots of pressure, it's a negative feedback loop, and then you start to associate weight loss with pain and discomfort when it should be sort of enjoyment and empowerment.
Yeah, 100%. We see this with every single client. So obviously one of the big tips that we give our clients is to opt the steps and just, literally get as many steps as you can in a way that is sustainable and enjoyable and fits into your life. And at first, they do it because there's the motivation and willpower there. And then they actually start to feel like really good doing it. And then there might be like a week where they, for whatever reason, they're not able to get the steps in and they feel so much worse. And they come in and they say, like, I wasn't able to get the steps in. I felt terrible as a consequence. My focus, my energy levels, my mood. And that's when I know, right, well, basically steps is now going to become part of someone's life now. And when you are so obsessed about weight loss, when the only reason that you're eating healthy or exercising or getting steps in is just to lose weight, and because you're punishing yourself and it's coming from a place of negativity, you completely disregard the other positives that you get from doing these things. How you feel better, how you're feeling less hungry, how your mood is improved, your focus, your productivity, your attention, everything improves, but you're cut off from that because you're focused on weight loss. And the only way that it's ever going to become a way of life is if you feel those other benefits and you learn to enjoy the process. I think, look, if there's one thing I want you listeners to get from this is when something happens in your life, a challenge, children get ill, life throws you a curveball and maybe you can't do what you were doing before, just ask yourself the question, okay, I can't do that, but what can I do? What can I do? And there will always be something that you can do. And what we're trying to get you to understand on this podcast is that the small things still count. The tiny 1% improvements every single day add up to a huge, huge difference. I think James Clear talks a lot about this in Atomic Habits. He puts a number on it, doesn't he? So if you improve by 1% every day, it's like basically massive, massive improvements. All these small things like eating consistent meals, filling up on protein at each meal, drinking more water, aiming to get out and get some steps in, going to bed at the same time and waking up at the same time. Just these basic things still will potentially contribute to you being in a calorie deficit and continuing to lose weight, or at least maintaining your weight, instead of, I can't plan every single meal. I can't go to the gym 3 times like I said I was going to go this week. I'm traveling, which means I'm not in control of the meals. Because a big thing that a lot of our clients are really afraid of is like not having routine and not having structure. And, I have to kind of really take it back to the basics. And I asked them the question, what's wrong? Explain to me what's wrong with not having routine. And they're like, this, or that. And I'm like, obviously, yeah, having routine does make life easier. But they list all these things like, I can't do this, can't do this, can't do this. I then ask them, so how do you lose weight? What's the fundamental mechanism behind losing weight? And they're like, a calorie deficit. Yeah, correct. So is it conceivable that you could still be in a calorie deficit when you don't have routine? Yes or no? Well, yes, obviously it is. Okay, so what do you think you need to do in order to maintain a calorie deficit when you don't have routine? Well, I need to be mindful of my food. I need to make sure I still stay active in some way, shape, or form. Yep. Do you think that's conceivable when you don't have routine? Yeah, it probably is. So often it's not the fact, and you can apply this to so many different things, and we see this all the time with our clients, but it's the lack of routine isn't the problem. It's the beliefs about the lack of routine is the problem. So as soon as someone's on holiday or not really holidays, usually like business trips, or they've got people coming over, they've got people staying over, parents are coming over, which means they don't have the routine. So, what I would do in that situation is I would be planning ahead. I'd be like, okay, well, I can't do my workout this time because this is happening. So when can I do it? I'm not going to be able to plan my meals and go to the shops. Okay, so what can I do to navigate that? Whereas lots of our clients and people who don't understand this they're like, oh my God, my parents are coming over for a week. I've got absolutely no way that I'm going to be in control of any of this. So I'm just going to shove it all out the window and I'm going to wait till they leave. And that leads to a whole host of fuck it, bucket mentality, all or nothing thinking of, well, fuck it, I'm just going to eat this and do this because I'll start again next week. And you do that repeatedly throughout the year, and it just makes weight loss much, much harder. So focus on what can I do? and you apply this to any situation. And this is ultimately known as a growth mindset. So it's someone who sees challenges as opportunities to grow. So something happens in your life. What can I do to make the best out of this situation instead of just act the victim? Secondly, stop being afraid of not having routine. There's no reason why you can't still get results when you don't have routine. It just takes a bit of forward planning. You know, when I was really into Olympic lifting and I needed a gym for doing weights whenever I traveled, first thing I was doing, booking an Airbnb near a gym. You know, and I'm not saying that's what you have to do, but that's what I wanted to do because that's what I enjoyed doing. Instead of, oh my God, you know, I can't do my training because I'm traveling. It's just forward thinking and planning makes a huge difference. So, have we covered everything there, Shane, do you think?
I think so, yeah.
So, to summarize, perfect conditions do not exist. Okay? Perfect conditions don't exist. Having the idea that you need to wait for these perfect conditions to come will mean that you never take action. And that will keep you stuck in a cycle of stress, guilt, frustration, and anxiety. And the weight is likely to go on heavier and heavier and heavier every single year. The longer that you're stuck in this cycle, the more it becomes part of your identity. And then it becomes quite difficult to get out of. So understand and trust us, experts, that doing small, tiny tweaks and changes can add up into a massive difference. Ask yourself, what can I do in this situation, in this busy, stressful situation, that will potentially make things better and improve the situation? They all matter. Don't be a victim. Keeps you stuck. It's not an empowering place to be. And make sure that you are focusing on not just adjusting your external environment, but also your internal environment. Make sure that your inner reactions, your thoughts, your beliefs, your emotional regulation aren't making the situation worse. So obviously this stuff can be quite difficult to navigate by yourself, especially when you feel like you are stuck and you are really stressed and you've got children and you've got a job and you've got all these stresses in life. The number one way that you can relieve that stress is offloading your decision making to some coaches who know what they're doing. So, you know, our exact client who we've been working with for the past 10 years are busy, successful women over the age of 40 who are beginning to go through the changes of the menopause, which makes this even more complicated. So if you are one of those people who wants to offload their decision making and wants to take the stress off and just get clarity on what they need to do as an individual, there are a few ways in which you can get in touch. You can book in for a quick 10-minute chat, which is the quickest way that you can get in touch with us. Super relaxed. Either myself or one of the team. We'll just assess to see if we can help. That's it. You know, we're not going to pressure you into anything. We're not going to offer you anything on that call. It's just to see if we can help. You can also sign up for 52 days worth of free fat loss tips. You can click the link below. And you can also watch one of our in-depth masterclasses, again, if I click on the link below. But yeah, hopefully this was useful. Thanks for joining, Shane. Glad to have you back. We're going to be recording one a week. We're going to really up the amount of podcasts this year because we're getting a lot of good feedback from it. Yeah, thanks for joining, Shane.
Yeah, great to be back. Cheers, Max.
See you soon.